Mech pilots, online. BattleTech manuals, online. Long-term memory, offline. All systems bungled. Initiating BungleTech podcast.
In our 12th deployment of BungleTech, my spheroid co-host Michael and I are joined by Lynnvander Studios as we talk BattleTech Aces and AI on the BattleTech table, share some BungleTech news in our extraordinary Proclamation segment, relish the vicious kill of a Warhammer by a Shrike in our battlefield outcome report, reflect on a Woods cover rule mistake our venerable guest had been making, and read a sample collection from Operation Lancaster by Devon, Ramsey, and Butler. My MechWarrior friends, make sure your technicians have booted up their CPUs, scrubbed that RAM, and defraged those hard drives. If an AI is gonna take us out on the battlefield, we better know it's running at top form.
Bonus objective. Extraordinary Proclamation. Initiating.
Hello BattleTech pals. Before we get into it today, I wanted to announce that we've officially launched a Patreon for BungleTech. Our vision for our Patreon is to reward supporters with exclusive prizes, unique opportunities for recognition on our podcast, and the ability to participate in shaping the direction of it through the implementation of new Patreon-directed segments. As you can imagine, creating a podcast to the high production standards and quality we've set for BungleTech is no superficial feat. We put a lot of financial resources and, most importantly, time into making it all possible. If you are interested in being more involved with BungleTech, or just helping us out, check out our Patreon's various tier levels of Technician, MechWarrior, and Loremaster, and see what meets your fancy. As always, your support in our bungling endeavors, listener and Patreon alike, is much appreciated. Patreon link can be found in the show description notes. Thank you for your support.
Primary objective. Podcast topic segment. Initiating.
Hello everybody and welcome to episode 12 of BungleTech. Today is a super exciting day because we're here to talk BattleTech Aces. The exact opposite of what Michael and I are. And of course, today I'm joined once again by the wonderfully sensual, amazing, magnificent co-host, Michael. Say hello, Michael.
That's me. I'm here. Present and sensual, I guess.
Extremely so, Michael. And I'm not the only one that can testify to that because we are as well joined by the talented mastermind, #BlameJosh, Josh Dirksen from Lynnvander Studios. Welcome, Josh.
Hello, nice to be here.
We are super honored to have you here today, Josh. So, everybody, we're here today to talk about BattleTech Aces, and Josh is the man to talk to about this topic. So, for people that don't know anything about you somehow, can you tell us a little bit about Lynnvander Studios and yourself?
My name's Josh Dirksen. I've been gaming for most of my life. Used to run a number of different events for various miniatures games at local game stores, and made, I think the thing that probably, if you know of my name, the reason you probably would know about it if you play miniatures games is for something called Heroes of the Aturi Cluster, which is a full co-op conversion for X-Wing First Edition that I published for free as a PDF back in September 2015. And it was fairly popular. So it was an entirely cooperative, self-contained campaign that was like a full conversion for X-Wing. The following year, I joined Lynnvander Studios, which is a board game design studio. We're just outside Toronto, actually, in Canada. And we have been making licensed board games, so games based on movies, TV shows, books, what have you, for various publishers. And we've been doing that basically since 2016. As of about 2020, we started moving to publish some of our own games because when you design for other publishers for years and years, you have a lot of pitches that you wish were real games. So You end up with this big backlog of like, oh, we really should make that game. We all really liked it, but it didn't seem to find a good home, so let's make a home for it. And now we're starting to publish our own stuff, and we're doing some stuff with PAX as well, helping audiences come up with interesting games on a panel show we run called Design a Board Game Live.
Ooh, very, very cool.
And publishing those at PAX.
That's sick. That's very cool. So, we're here to talk about BattleTech Aces. But, Josh, what the heck is BattleTech Aces?
The simplest explanation for BattleTech Aces is this is an automated opponent that you can put in command of any Alpha Strike force. So it's basically a set of decks of cards. They're based on unit roles and capabilities. And you will just be able to, whenever it's time for your opponent to move a model, you will just reveal the card from that deck, follow some instructions, and it will give you a pretty decent opponent to play against.
So this is essentially a P versus E scenario for BattleTech.
Yeah, I think that's right. You can definitely play it solo. You can definitely play it cooperatively. You just, have a bunch of players on the same team and you run the entire opposing force with aces.
Cool. So what's your role in the development of it?
So our team is fairly small. Lynnvander is 3 people primarily. My role in the company and in this project are actually the same thing, which is that I am doing development and most likely in this case, graphic design and layout as well. But we have a lead designer and author, Dylan. We've got Tommy, who is our business developer and kind of overarching mastermind, film genius, movie genius. And then, between the 3 of us, we kind of have very different tastes in how games get made. But BattleTech, being a miniatures game, tends to fall more under my camp. Tommy's more of an RPG guy, and Dylan is more of a board gamer.
And do you have much history with BattleTech? Like, are you a longtime player? Are you pretty new to it?
My credentials for BattleTech are interesting. I might be one of few people who can say this. I've only been playing BattleTech in any form, Alpha Strike and or Classic, a little over a year. I did not know anything about the IP or the rules or the game, any of it. Didn't know anything about it other than a brief encounter with like MechWarrior 2 when I was a kid. I think I played it one time at a friend's house. I did not know anything about BattleTech until last fall when we ran some content for Six Sides of Gaming, our partner sibling Twitch channel, where Randall Bills from Catalyst Game Labs taught me how to play Alpha Strike using the box set on stream. And that video is on YouTube. So if you want to watch me learn how to play BattleTech, you can watch Randall teach me. And my dice are fire and his are ice. He just gets utterly massacred.
That's actually really interesting. BattleTech's like, I know it's not the biggest, most popular, tabletop game, but like it's been around for a long time. I'm sort of similar. I only got into playing BattleTech maybe 2 years ago. And, even then I had like some awareness of it. Like I'd seen more than one MechWarrior thing in my life.
Yeah, I always kind of knew it was there, but it was like, don't get me wrong, I've played a lot of miniatures games, just the BattleTech was never one of them.
And have you played both Classic and Alpha Strike now? Are you mostly Alpha Strike player, though?
I prefer the company scale engagement of Alpha Strike. But I've played some Classic, and I definitely appreciate, like, if you were going to run, a role-playing game campaign and you wanted, sort of D&D level depth combat, you definitely want Classic.
So 1 year ago, on stream in front of everyone, you topple the king and learn to love Alpha Strike. A year later, you're presenting a PvE BattleTech Alpha Strike engine.
Pretty much.
That's a real quick turnaround.
Yeah, but there's some history here. Like this is not the first time I've done something like this, and it's not even the second time. Because I mentioned Heroes of the Aturi cluster. The thing that made that campaign exciting and that it was cooperative is that I not only wrote the campaign and this whole sort of pilot progression for X-Wing, but I had written an automated opponent that was basically just you took a single reference sheet for each type of Imperial ship and you could run the game off of that. And I was actually playtesting for Fantasy Flight around the same time. I did a lot of playtesting for X-Wing First Edition. And I showed it to them and they didn't really know what to do with it. Their policy as a company was to sort of develop everything in-house. Like they don't hire external designers or any of that. And I ended up just publishing it like free web thing and like, hey guys, I did this thing, check it out. So when I started at Lynnvander, my business partner Tommy was immediately like, well, you've got this really good engine here that works for basically flight path, which is the name for the movement system that X-Wing uses. There's also a Star Trek game that uses the same movement rules. Like, how hard do you think it would be to adapt this to Star Trek? And I was like, it's the same game with a different coat of paint almost. The cards are different, but all the mechanics are identical. I was like, so it should just work. And he said, well, we got a couple of these other games that we're going to show WizKids. We're going to pitch them to WizKids because that year we went to Origins. And we used to do Origins all the time, still do, run demo content there. As designers, we got on and we pitched to publishers. And we took this meeting with WizKids to show them a couple of different board games, all of which they were interested in, and they took some prototypes. And at the end of the meeting, Tommy was like, hey, what would you think about a fully cooperative campaign version of Star Trek Attack Wing? And their reaction at the time was just, oh, well, what? That doesn't make any sense. That can't be done. How could you do that? And Tommy just goes, well, not only can it be done, it has been done. Here's the thing. And they were like, oh, yes, we would like that. and then that took us, that meeting was in 2016. We worked on the bulk of it. It took probably a year and a half to figure out how exactly they were going to pull it off. We did the bulk of the design in 2018. And then it sat in licensor approvals / manufacturing issues / fulfillment issues / COVID problems until like mid-2021 when it finally shipped. And then did really, really well. It completely revitalized Attack Wing as a game line. They told us that they were, going to reprint it, do extra units. They were going to reprint old stuff again because there was demand for old models because of the co-op solo mode. I had some rules in there where you could adapt older models that weren't really in print or are super available. So I think they definitely got a spike in sales from that. So we did a trilogy called Star Trek Alliance. It is a cooperative campaign in 3 box sets. We did that trilogy for WizKids. The third installment of that trilogy actually just came out this year, a couple months ago. In the same vein, so we did Heroes of the Turi Cluster, ported that rule system to Star Trek Attack Wing. I then did Snapship's Tactics. They made this super modular sort of spaceship Lego toy. And I approached them and I said, this is great. Like, could we use these as miniatures for a tabletop game? And they kind of laughed at me because that was actually their original concept. They wanted to do a what you see is what you get miniatures game. Making the toy turned out to be so complicated with all the nuts and bolts of like plastics and manufacturing that their journey was like 4 or 5 years in when they released. And they got so involved with making the toy a reality that they had to shelve all of their game ideas. So when I met them, I had been building cool custom models using their toy and posting them to Instagram. And they were like, well, we basically wanted to make an X-Wing style game. You've done 2 of those already, and you've been building all of our custom models. Oh, and the board game company you work for publishes or designs licensed property board games. Like, all these Venn diagrams, you're in the middle. So I guess you're hired. Let's go. So we showed that at conventions for 2 years. But that also has an AI opponent. So you can play any of the models in that game with a deck of cards against yourself.
So you have all this experience building AI opponents, but I'm really curious about what sparked the interest of bringing this concept into the BattleTech universe, because BattleTech is amazing, but it has a very consistent rule base across the years. And is also a little bit old school. And this is a pretty new age concept.
Especially because like X-Wing spaceships that fly, Star Trek spaceships that fly, Snap fighters spaceships that fly. What was it about Alpha Strike that like you're like, hey, this would be a great fit?
Because mechs should fly.
Yeah. I want to come back to that in a little bit more detail in a minute, because that was actually one of the most interesting challenges of making an AI opponent for BattleTech. The story of Aces actually really begins with my partner in crime, business partner Tommy, who has been doing stuff with the folks at Catalyst for a number of years. We designed a couple of games for them. We did Super Camelot with them, which is a Kickstarter for a sort of 8-bit looking or 16-bit looking King Arthur board game that did reasonably well on Kickstarter. They sold quite a few units. The third member of our team, Dylan, actually was lead designer on Shadowrun Sprawl Ops for Catalyst, and that was actually how we met him. At the time, we used to have these company blazers with the crest on the back, and Dylan put my blazer on one day as a joke because I had left it over the back of a chair while we were playtesting. And he put my blazer on and was strutting around the room, flexing his shoulders, going like, "Oh, ha, ha, I'm part of Lynnvander, blah, 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 blah." And Tommy and I are laughing. And then we were talking afterwards, like, this isn't the worst idea. We should hire this guy. And it was the kind of the genesis of the current team of Lynnvander. But we met Dylan through Catalyst. We had been doing work with Catalyst. We did those 2 games. We also did Shadowrun Takedown. That was an older game. I think we showed them a number of years ago and has been through quite a few changes. But so we've been working with them on and off. And Tommy has always been a big BattleTech fan. He played MechWarrior and MechWarrior Online pretty extensively. And he always wanted to do something with the IP because he's also big Shadowrun fan, big BattleTech fan, wanted to work with Catalyst forever. So he's been kind of like bugging him as we're doing all these other projects. He's been just like, "Hey guys, we got this guy who knows how to make like AI opponents. Can we stick this in BattleTech somewhere?" And that's been, years of building that relationship and developing that repertoire with them, having done these other projects with them. And then it was kind of like Clan Invasion Kickstarter hit for them. It hit very well. Dominoes into the Mercenaries Kickstarter, which hits even bigger. And of course, the pandemic happened where there were a lot of people with BattleTech at home and no way to really play it because they couldn't get together to put miniatures on a table and play the game, right? Playing digitally is not really quite the same. So all of those things together was just kind of like doing an automated opponent for BattleTech or for Alpha Strike. Seems like it could be a pretty good idea that a lot of people would enjoy. Lynnvander, how the heck would you even do this? Because you've got these other 3 games that you made. They all have this really regimented movement with like specialty rulers that you place against the models and move them fixed distances. You're now talking about a game that has almost completely freeform movement using a tape measure in contrast. Like, how do you even?
And was this before or after you had ever played the game?
That entire discussion was before I had played the game. Tommy getting Randall to teach me on stream was a cunning, like, let's do one thing that serves all the purposes. Yeah, he was like, well, Catalyst really wants to do like a learn to play video for Alpha Strike because it's pretty new and not too many people know how to play it. And we want to make some more content, and BattleTech content's been doing pretty well for us so far on the stream because we just started trying to build our channel. Oh, and Josh should probably learn how to play it because I really want to do a BattleTech product. Like, I think that was actually the calculus, and it was, again, like the bullseye of all this Venn diagram, right?
So he was the real mastermind. You're the mind, but he's the mastermind.
Yeah, well, see, here's the thing about Tommy. Tommy, in truest noble fashion, he will paint the picture and lay the groundwork for the troops to marshal through it, right? He will pitch these ridiculous projects, these ridiculous ideas, completely blue sky thinking, and people will go like, "Wait, what, can we do that?" And then I come in afterwards and go, "Oh yeah, we can do that. Here's how we do that."
You mentioned the challenge of adapting an AI system, or developing an AI system rather, for the open-ended movement of BattleTech. Was that the biggest challenge in development, or has there been a bigger challenge that you think is noteworthy?
There's a couple of things that I find we always run into with automated opponents. I feel like my way of designing something like this is maybe different than a lot of other designers would tackle it. My background and my education is largely as a graphic designer who was always interested in board games and had done some computer science and programming type work, but always more on the art side and the human factors or user interface, user experience side of it. So the first thing for me when we were looking at this was always just like, okay, we can write a really detailed set of steps for like, if this happens, do this, and get a pretty decent opponent out of it. But I don't really want to read a 2-page document every time it's the AI unit's turn to do something and step through it, because then I'm going to spend more time playing the game or operating the game than I am, making moves for my own forces. If I come up against a game like that, I feel like the game is playing me and I'm not playing the game, right? And there are board games that I've played that I have this problem with.
Yeah.
But that's always the first challenge, and that exists in any of these kind of make an automated opponent situations. So I always look at that as, how can you make the user interface and the instructions as simple as possible? Like, can I look at the instructions, resolve them in 5 to 20 seconds, and then get on with my turn? Like, if I don't have to think about what the opponent has to do, I just have to follow some instructions and move the parts. Perfect. Now I can play the game, and there's a little upkeep step that the game is playing back, right? That's the ratio I want.
And do you think you succeeded with Aces?
Well, it's been an ongoing battle. We made a draft, actually. There's the first draft of the Aces rule set and a couple of the decks that are compatible with the Alpha Strike starter set. They were available during the Mercenaries Kickstarter campaign. You could download them if you backed it. You got them in your bundle of downloadable stuff, because they were available for basically public playtesting. The cards have become a little more complex, but it's an ongoing battle to try and just simplify. What's the simplest instruction I can give you to execute that makes the unit do what I want?
Mm-hmm.
That makes it play against you in a way that's interesting, that makes you go, oh, I didn't expect them to flank me like this, or to get behind me, or to not engage at all, to back up and stand on this hill and blast me from a distance. Like, all of those play patterns are in there. I'm just figuring out how to get them kind of coming out in a way that is easy enough to actually execute is really the challenge.
Yeah. On that topic, I've looked at the cards, and I feel like, first, I think it's really interesting how you've set basically AI movement conditions or behavior conditions, and you're not just trying to fulfill one of them. You're trying to fulfill all of them that can be true based on the priority order, right? So it's not just like move towards opponent. It would be move towards opponent into woods cover or something like that, like additional conditionals that you can add. And I haven't played it. I feel like this would be something that would feel very challenging the first time you played, but once you started seeing it, it would become very agile.
Yeah, and I assume you've read the rules for it. You haven't just looked at the cards, yeah?
Correct, yeah.
One of the things we learned from that initial version that was available on the Mercenaries Kickstarter is that at least a third, if not half, maybe even more, of the people who playtested it and gave us feedback were not doing the steps as intended. Those cards are actually kind of not great for that. And there are a few that are, I will just say, broken. They instruct you to do things that kind of don't make sense.
Yeah.
And that was kind of to be expected. It was very much an alpha. But the big thing there is, like, I realized a lot of people they're used to playing board games where individual instructions are yes-no statements. Like, if true, do this. Okay, if that's not true, look at the next line. If that's true, do that. And you process the whole tree that way. The way they were actually intended to be played, and the rulebook, again, doesn't do a great job of this in the existing prototype, but the way they were intended to be played is actually as if each instruction is trying to narrow down possible places to go, like a logic puzzle, which actually means that every line has 3 outcomes, not 2. You either can do a line, in which case, yes, you're doing that, and you're going to look to the next line for some refinement about, okay, well, if it tells me to move towards the enemy within the distance of my available movement, there's like 180-degree like half circle, right? There's half a circle of space in front of the mech that fulfills that condition, because any of those locations in that area are closer to me. Okay, well, if I can do that, if there's any way to get closer, I'm going to get closer. Well, the next row should actually be within that space, what fulfills the criteria. So if it's go into woods second, well, it's within that 180-degree half circle. Where can I move in there that gives me woods? Okay, well, then only the places that overlap both of those instructions should be considered. And the whole point of those instructions was to whittle it down until there was one and only one ideal place to go that the AI really wanted to go. And usually you could get there in like 3 instructions, or depending on the map you were playing and what the terrain was like, maybe you'd get there in 1. But what we found is that a lot of people were treating them as yes-no statements. So when I designed all this logic and was like, okay, well, this is going to make sure that the brawlers are advancing to point blank range and fighting up close, people would go, well, I can't get closer, so I'm going to skip that priority entirely. I answered as a no. Then I'm going to check the second one and go for woods. And we saw a lot of stuff where like AI units would just stand in woods in their starting area.
Yeah.
Or stuff like that. Because if you interpret it literally like yes, no, like the way you'd be familiar with doing it, you didn't really get the behavior that was intended from the decks. Some people were kind of good just to look at like, oh, I look at all four criteria. I go, oh, let's just see how many of them I can make true. And that's kind of right, but it doesn't. If you have a circle and you chop a piece out of it because this condition and you chop a piece out of it because of that condition, the order you chop actually matters, not just doing all the chops.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I think made the cards individually interesting that I was seeing wasn't quite happening. So a big part of the challenge there is actually a rulebook presentation challenge. There's a better way to explain this with diagrams and to teach the concept, and then design the cards, improve the cards in such a way that they reinforce that concept.
And how much of this is sort of carried over? Like, are these the same types of things you had to do with the earlier game engines you built, the earlier AIs? Or did they work in a similar way with similar challenges?
Oh God, no. This is actually almost entirely new because, like I said, all of those other games have very measured, regimented movement in specific directions and angles. Part of why the AI I wrote for X-Wing was so brutal is because when it was time to activate an AI unit, you would just roll a d6 and consult where on a little chart where you were relative to the target and how far away you were. And the die roll was to give you one of 6 random outputs from that table.
Mm-hmm.
But they were designed in such a way that like the AI knew the math of the game, of like the geometry of all the maneuvers. So it would know if you're at this distance in this arc relative to me. If I do a turn this direction and flip around, I'll have you in my firing arc. And I did that literally by taking a really big sheet of chart paper, putting a model in the middle of it, running out all the rulers, moving the models, and then drawing the firing arcs back on to see if they would work. Like I just totally brute forced it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that with a game that has completely free-form movement. You need a completely different paradigm. And most of the development challenge early on was just, what even is the paradigm that makes this possible? And then, okay, it's sort of working. Like you've got a set of instructions you can follow that mechanically do something. Okay, well then how do you make that not even do a good move? How do you make it not do a stupid move?
Yeah, because I suppose that's one of those things that, like, if you have like a really good opponent that's like making good decisions or making mediocre decisions, that's sort of, you can give it kudos, but all it takes is like one like really dumb moment for a player to be like, oh, this thing's so stupid. Look at that, it walked into the lake.
Yep, exactly. My philosophy with these is always sort of threefold, right? The first piece is make it as easy to operate as possible. So the game isn't playing me, I'm playing the game, and I'm just doing a little bit of upkeep to make it go. Second thing is, let's prevent it from making a dumb move. Mm-hmm. If it does no dumb moves, okay, great. It's playing like a player who understands the game.
Not how we play the game in BungleTech. Just some players play the game.
Yes, minimal bungles. And then the third thing is really, it has to do with how do you, once you've played against it a few times, how do you make sure that you don't just memorize all of its play patterns and outplay it so that the same way that, you play with your one friend all the time and they really like to play, spotters and indirect fire. And you're like, okay, we're just playing this game again. I know the strategy for dealing with this. How do you give it enough variety that you can never quite be sure if you do this move, you don't know for sure that it's going to come and engage you and take your bait. Or if you bait it with a light unit, you're like, well, it's definitely going to charge in with that thing, and then I'm going to flank around behind it with this other thing. Like, building a trap that it just falls into because you know exactly how it plays. How do you prevent it from doing that?
Yeah.
And that's actually the biggest challenge that you really only overcome through repetition once the other parts work.
And right now, don't you have about 8 different distinct behavior cards per unit type, like Brawler, Sniper, whatever? They'll have 8 different behavior cards that are quite diverse and different?
I would say they follow a coherent strategy at the moment. Like, generally speaking, the AI deck for Striker wants to flank, be out of line of sight, and eventually pounce, get behind you, and do, rear damage. Brawler tends to be the anvil upon which the hammer is struck. So it tends to make sure that it can see lots of things, make sure that it has cover, make sure that it can actually shoot at a bunch of things and just be scary and control the middle part of the board.
Mm-hmm.
Running tests where like you put a lance of 4 strikers down or just 4 brawlers and seeing if the decks still work together has been interesting testing. So has been, here's a lance or a lance or a star where we've got one of each type. And does that work? Do they support each other well? Do they feel like they work together as a team? Has been another interesting question, because so much of BattleTech is about, unless you're a clanner with your honor, you're gonna focus up and your 4 light mechs kind of have to work together to shoot one thing, or there's no point, right?
Yeah.
So right now, the design that's being built, it is being built from the perspective of inner sphere strategy. Like, it's not like Clan or Zellbriggen. It wouldn't work. Like, you couldn't, thematically, you can obviously use these cards with clan mechs, but technically they'd be breaking all the rules.
Yes, but the thing that has been, so we've continued to develop it since we released it for the Mercenaries Kickstarter. It's been through 2 major iterations since then. The current iteration has some substantial changes, which they're a little bit more involved to develop, but they're actually easier to play the game and you get better AI performance as a result.
Nice.
And the main thrust of this change is actually that the individual mech decks are a little smaller,
mm-hmm.
but they have variables for what they're supposed to do that are actually controlled by an additional deck, which lives to the side of the play area, which is like the Force Commander.
Oh my god, I was just about to ask you this. I was seriously wondering if you had anything like a Mythos deck, like Eldritch Horror, something that changed the overall lay of the game, like the BattleTech Initiative Deck, for example. Changes the abilities of the lance.
Yes, that was actually the inspiration.
Ah, yes.
The BattleTech Initiative Deck was actually the inspiration for this, because one of the things that Randall and I talked about in a development meeting was, boy, it would be really great if the AI could take advantage of the formation rules in the Alpha Strike book. So if you put, 4 mechs together in a lance that have these criteria, you get this special ability for them. And that's something relatively new. I think it was part of Alpha Strike, but didn't really exist in BattleTech until a few years ago. And also, boy, it would be really great if the AI is playing as a Lance of Caretans is different than when they're playing a Clan Star. And I was like, well, we can make separate decks for those. And he's like, yeah, but come Ilclan era, everybody basically has everything.
Yeah.
My words, not his. Like, you can expect to see, houses fielding clan mechs because they're salvage, or they're, in some cases, omni mechs they built themselves. You can end up in a situation where you can basically put any mech in any faction, potentially,
mm-hmm.
and building a deck that's like, this is specifically supposed to run a clan mech, doesn't really make sense when there are no other mechanical differences in the way the units behave. They have all the same kinds of numbers and all the same kinds of stats.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, boy, that would actually sounds fantastic. I wonder if we could do that. And then I set out to try and figure out how to do it in a way that wasn't Gameplays U. And that's how we arrived at this Force deck. It's early days yet on that, a little bit, looking at how it might implement the formation abilities, as well as how we can do faction differences with them. Perfect world, I would actually love to make a whole bunch of them and make them specific people from the BattleTech universe. This one is Victor Davian. This one is Alaric Ward. Like,
Catherine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
There's no shortage of awesome BattleTech personalities that you put in command of a force, and they'd have different command styles.
Yeah.
And if we really want to, we go the initiative deck route where we put a special ability on them as well.
Mm-hmm. So that makes me so happy, because once again, I haven't played Aces. I've seen it played, and I've looked at the rule set. And in that process, I was thinking to myself, that's the lacking element. And so the fact that that's been implemented, because how you've built the AI out, the sort of multiple conditions that we're discussing before, very cool concept. And I think throwing that force thing on top, that just it's going to be so hard to predict. And especially if you add unique abilities associated with that force deck, it's going to be such a unique experience every time you play it, and you're really going to have to stay sharp. So that is so cool.
Without just making it like, a giant 50 card deck, because then like you say, they don't really have a strategy anymore. The cards aren't going to be coherent. They're just going to be, it's going to be more like random what they're doing.
Yeah, basically. And the nuts and bolts of how that kind of shakes out is you end up with the force commander has some kind of general priorities for certain kinds of targets. He actually handles the target priority for, these are the enemy units we currently care about. And then the individual mech decks are actually more focused on, okay, well, of those priorities, which ones do we engage? Which ones do we avoid? Where do we focus our fire? Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And they're able to look at that overarching card to figure out what they should be doing.
Kind of like a tactics deck and a strategy deck.
Yeah, that is exactly the division. So the mech has to be in charge of doing its own business, but it needs to take orders from somewhere. And it sounds like the Aces decks that were available during the Mercenaries campaign, it was funny, like we designed them for clanners, but actually they made really good clanners that weren't following Zellbriggen because they were all incredibly selfish and only cared about what they were doing individually. Like, the Fire Moth pilot, he's picked this turn as the turn to throw himself upon the enemy because that's for honor. Well, it's too bad that the Warhawk and Timberwolf decided to hide or take cover from long range this turn and not actually be threatening. To, make sure he doesn't get ganged up and murdered.
Send the Fire Moth in!
Yeah.
Okay, I've actually played with some people on my team, and that's actually perhaps a more realistic simulation.
Sure, but I don't get the sense when I play against that version of the AI that they were working together at all. Sometimes it would work out that they all decided to attack at the same time, and then they felt scary. But other times they were like, "Well, that guy just got sacrificed."
You need a random voiceover box that goes with the cards when you play it down. You have that situation where the Timberwolf's like, "I'm getting out of here. I'm afraid." And the Fire Moth's like, "Let's go kill." And you're like, "Oh my god, I'm playing with real people."
It's funny you mentioned that because for the longest time, the cards are small. We don't want to make them any bigger because they got to fit under an Alpha Strike card. But there was a stage in development where we were like, we're going to put flavor text comm chatter on every card. Like, he's gonna describe what he's gonna do with this priority, where his intent is.
That's kind of fun.
Even if you fumble reading the instructions, there's still he wanted to do this. He said he was gonna do that. We should make that make sense for him, right?
I can honestly never get enough flavor text. BattleTech has good flavor text. It always fun, a little bit ridiculous. I love it.
Yeah, and I think it sort of fits because when I was thinking about this and I was sort of reading through, and the version I've seen is obviously an earlier version, doesn't have the dual deck setup or anything, but
right.
I was sort of reading it, and you had the golden rules of how you resolve these things, and then what you were talking about earlier about how you sort of it's a series of things to pare down what decisions the mech is supposed to make.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was thinking through that, it feels almost like something that Nathan and I have both done, which is like role playing. It's almost like, giving you a script to play this character by of well, they're going to focus on this. This is a secondary concern. And then if they can manage this as well, that's what they want to do. And then you have to think through okay, what of these actions you have to look at the table and be okay, well, this gets them closest to that. This does this does that. That's where they would go. And so that's sort of interesting. I think that the idea of flavor text would be cool as well to get more of that mentality of what's the pilot thinking here? What are they trying to do?
Obviously, some things have been clicking. This Force deck coming out, it's a really great idea. Has there been something that comes to mind where you're like, aha, that's it in the development process so far?
The Force deck was actually the big change there because we've done a ton of testing with each mech gets a deck, it draws a card every turn and does a thing, and realized that unless you have a whole bunch of brawlers in your force, they're never really going to work together to kill the thing that's really big and scary that their cards say they should be concentrating on as a unit type. That's kind of annoying because I don't really want to give brawler decks to striker units or skirmishers because they should have their own roles. They should be doing different stuff. This is kind of annoying and limited, and I only have 8 cards, and eventually you'll just learn them, because Paul over at Fox Network and Tommy have been playing every Friday on Six Sides of Gaming, they've been playing and streaming BattleTech Aces stuff. At this point, Paul knows the AI real well. Like, they've been playing those 8-card decks, even the current versions, without the Force deck in there. And they're like, oh, I know exactly, if I stand out right now, they will all swarm on me and I will die. I'm not going to stick my head out this turn. I'm going to pick a more isolated engagement. And they really got to the point where they learned it. It seems incredibly intuitive that you would say, like, oh, well, if you want all the mechs to work together, they need some kind of instruction that isn't in any of their decks. That sounds incredibly obvious. Wasn't really. The other thing that sounds incredibly obvious is like, well, if you want the whole team to do something coherent from round to round, you can't just draw a random card for each one every turn. You kind of need something that doesn't draw a random card every turn to give them some instructions.
You can say that it's incredibly obvious, but I certainly didn't pop into my mind. And like, even when you start describing it, I can't think of like how that would work. There's so much between the idea of like, hey, what if we had a Force commander, and like, how does that actually work?
Yep.
How do you put that together?
Yeah, you're exactly right. That is exactly what it is.
Michael mentioned an example of the AI golden rule, which you put in the instruction manual. I'm just going to read it out, which is, whenever you resolve an instruction for an AI unit and there are multiple options that are not addressed by the card, choose the option that will benefit the AI unit the most. There are quite a few sections in the alpha rules that explain pick the best if you're unsure what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that still exists? And how does that actually play out in practice? Because I'm a player that's very good at punishing myself. Like, I love punishing myself.
Yep.
But I know lots of other players are going to find a way to sneak away from that.
So the fun part about that particular line, and I've had some conversations with Tommy, and I've watched things that he's done on stream when I haven't been playing, and I've been like, yes. How good or how effective that rule is depends entirely upon how well the player who is operating AI understands the game. Which is great if you're like, oh, you get awesome performance and punishingly great moves if you use the AI as a framework and put an experienced player in charge of doing things with it, because they're like, oh, you wouldn't do that. That instruction makes no sense. Strike that. Within these first couple lines of instructions, this is very clearly the best thing because this is the move I would make. It's really strong. Well, that's great. And those players are going to get a really compelling, tense game against an AI opponent. It's not so great when you have someone who's just bought the Alpha Strike box set, has never played Classic, has played Alpha Strike twice, is still learning how the modifiers work, and they want to play that game against the AI. And that instruction is like, well, what do I do now? I don't know. No, none of these moves seem good, or I don't understand what's good, so I don't know what I should have it do. Mm-hmm. And I think you need that rule in the game just as a fallback, but I kind of view it as a cop-out of like, you should never really have to use that if I've designed the cards well. Or maybe you're doing some really weird situation that I didn't contemplate when I wrote the cards, or like you've got a battlefield that has no terrain on it at all, or something strange like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to make sure that we still have good fallbacks.
Yeah, that, like you say, it's a fallback, and ideally, if you're finding yourself in situations where that happens, you would want to add more detail to that card.
Exactly.
Although there is something to be said about an AI that scales based on your understanding and performance in the game. The better you get, the meaner it gets to you. That's interesting. But I definitely understand what you're saying. A first-time player comes into it and they're like, I don't know what to do. This is frustrating, right?
Yeah, and I would rather it be as on rails as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason I like cooperative games or designing games for solo play in the first place is like, if you've played some board games, you probably understand that like there are certain games you don't play with certain people because they don't give you like the optimal experience, right?
Everyone says that about me. Why do people say that about me?
Are you the player that has to win by carrying everyone on your back?
I might be a little bit of a rule Nazi, despite
yes,
being so bad at remembering the rules. I'm a contradiction, good sir.
But you understand what I'm talking about, though.
I do, 100%,
yeah,
100%, yeah. And especially if you go into the D&D realm, the example's 100% clear.
So for me, like part of why I like developing these solo and co-op opponents is like it's almost like, with a video game where you've got everyone's going to get the same experience as far as the opposing force is concerned.
Mhm.
Like you get a few outliers here and there, but generally it is a stable, performs consistently opponent, so
Mhm.
that you can be fairly certain that when you start doing things like putting it into weird scenarios or giving it other weird units, you're still going to get stable performance.
Mhm.
And that's a big part of what I like about that system. So then you're only concerned about which player is your wingman for co-op, or what mechs you're piloting, or what moves you're making, and you don't have to worry too much about like, oh well, is this game going to be balanced and good because we set AI up a certain way or didn't use certain things or whatever, right?
Yeah. And how would you say it's going so far? Like how challenging is the current iteration?
I'll give you this by way of what I would refer to as a handicap. The Mercenaries era Aces deck, we were playing against it and giving it somewhere in the range of 15 to 25% increased PV.
Mhm.
So you would play your forces, you would add on a quarter, you would give that to AI, and in a straight up fight, it would do pretty well. If you were like being very tricky and trying to bait it, it probably still wouldn't do very well.
Mhm.
One of the big things that got added in testing after that is a whole subset of logic about heat management on a per card basis. That changed the game entirely. AI units that can understand when to spend their overheat value in Alpha Strike, which is to say when they should Alpha Strike, are ludicrously dangerous. They got closer to parity on point value. I've played some competitive games of Alpha Strike against some very good players now as well. Mostly just for research for me, because the AI is only going to be as good as I understand how to play the game.
Yeah.
Or as I understand the game works, not even if I play it that well. So playing against and watching players who really understand how to make the game work and how to really min-max their forces and their strategies has been super helpful. But like managing overheat was a big one. And some of the like not falling for simple traps. Like if you get to that point and do that, if you can make it not consistently fall for, the classic hammer and anvil, all of a sudden it gets to be pretty dangerous. So now when I play, I find I get pretty good performance for nearing parity on point value,
Nice.
which is great.
So it's well on its way to surpassing you.
At least I can be like, well, a reasonable difficulty for the scenario is equal points, but if I want the scenario really hard, I give them the 25% bump, and then it's like, oh boy.
That's sort of cool. And that sort of makes sense that, you don't necessarily need like knobs to make the AI more difficult because they handicap knob in BattleTech, which is battle value. So, you can always adjust like how good it is there.
And that was kind of my goal. Like, that's sort of the secret fourth pillar, which is like change as little as possible from
Mhm.
the game that you're making this opponent for.
Mhm.
I could totally make an automated opponent that just said something to the effect of, don't care what the unit does, don't care what its movement value is, don't care what its shooting value is, put it in the nearest woods as an AI instruction. And like, you could play against that. You could move some models around on the table and they would do things. But would you be playing the same game that you would be playing against a human player in terms of what the capabilities of those models are? It's a completely different experience. So from my perspective, change as little as possible so that we're playing the game, you know?
Yeah.
And you made a really good point about like BV being the ultimate handicap knob. And I think that's kind of where I went. Like I'd rather you use the tools that exist in the standard game between players rather than giving the automated opponent its own knobs.
Mhm.
So I think that this is a fundamental change to the BattleTech experience. And you've already touched upon it a little bit. Like, one way this fundamentally changes the BattleTech experience is it's much easier to play with a bigger breadth of players now. Because you're playing co op, you don't need to worry about sort of the situation with PvP with someone. You doing a BV game of 5,000 and someone bringing 50 Savannah Masters and just ramming you in the legs. Little things like that can frustrate some people. So now it's a team
Mm-hmm.
game. When you're playing on a team together, generally you're more lenient and understanding. So to me, it opens up. It opens up to the people that you'd even want to play BattleTech with at the table. But beyond that, in your eyes, how does this fundamentally change other elements of the BattleTech experience?
So the best part about cooperative play that I have found is that you now have an opponent that does not care how cheesy your list is. It will take as much punishment as you want to dish it, and it will come back for more because it doesn't know any better. Sometimes that's incredibly satisfying. Best example I can think of for this ever was just the magical moment, one of the first times we play tested the automated opponent for Heroes of the Aturi cluster. We were all playing X-Wings and Y-Wings and Rebel Starfighters, and I had just given a squadron of TIE Fighters over to the AI. And like, TIE Fighters are basically cannon fodder. Like, they're pretty agile, but they it's pretty possible to one-shot them. And even though they were making good moves and would occasionally trip us up, just having a bunch of players steamroll through and like splash TIE Fighters left and right immediately put us into the film. Like, we felt like we were on screen playing like the attack on the Death Star from Star Wars: A New Hope. Like, we felt like we were right there on screen splashing TIE Fighters, Heroes of the Rebellion. We felt awesome about it. And you don't ever really get that feeling in a game that's designed to be competitive, because both sides are usually so evenly matched that you wear each other down unit for unit.
And if you're not evenly matched, then one player may not be having a good time.
It's a massacre, yeah. So that's the first thing I feel is kind of a big difference and a big change in just sort of the feeling of the game. So if you've read the books, playing like cooperatively, you know, if you've read the books, it's more like you will feel like one of the characters who's come to life out of that page. They'll have these cinematic moments where what the AI is doing and how it's operating are completely opaque to you, even though you're the one kind of operating the cards. And it divorces it from your experience of running the game so that you can play as yourself, right? You get those wonderfully cinematic moments.
Yeah, sort of touching on the role-playing thing again. I don't know how much of this there is in Alpha Strike, but I know in BattleTech Classic, sort of campaigns run by a particular game master are a fairly popular way to play. And you get to have 3 or 4 people at the table are all playing together. They're part of a squad. They're being the big damn heroes. And one person is there and they're op 4. They're everything else.
Yep.
With this, maybe you can have those games where you're working together. You've got your lance and you're fighting the dirty clan invaders or whatever, but you don't need someone to set that up. You can just show up with your deck of cards, drop the opposing mechs, and then you can play that adventure without anyone going through all the GMing work.
Oh, absolutely. Like I was saying, the AI doesn't care if it gets pummeled to oblivion and keeps coming back for more, whereas the GM who's in charge of running the Op 4, and I know because I've been this guy for playing campaigns in various games, like, sometimes it'd be really nice not to have to be that guy in the playgroup.
Yeah. Figuring out how to lose subtly and not wipe the table with your party.
Yeah, like you have your job is to ride the edge of putting up a good fight, and then you have to lose. Like the thrill of danger, right? Oh, I'm gonna get you. Oh no, it was just a roller coaster haunted house moment of, oh, you came up fine from the other end. I definitely feel like there's a lot of room to run any of the RPG content. You know, your game master can play, add his own NPC to the squad and play that character, or just even be one of them, and then have all of these opponents sort of pre-cooked. The only decision that really needs to be made is what we're fighting and not how they will fight. I feel like that's a complete shift in how that feels.
Yeah, and I think, speaking from my own experience, I've played Classic, I've played Alpha Strike. I really lean towards Classics. I like the sort of granularity. But when I hear you explaining how this works, if I'm doing a PvE situation, I totally am 100% down to do this in the Alpha Strike format. Like, it really interests me to play Alpha Strike this way in the collaborative setting. Whereas when I'm playing against another person in PvP, I want all those advanced rules to give me different perspectives and different edges on the battlefield. I want it to be more like a chess match, whereas this is still chess, but it's just a different feeling that, I don't know, it's really calling to me, to be honest, hearing you explain it. You've converted me, Josh.
Well, Paul from Fox Network tells me this all the time. He's like, I had no interest in playing Alpha Strike until I heard that you guys were doing Aces and I started streaming it with you. And now he runs Alpha Strike at conventions to teach people the setting and show off cool mech models, because he can play, a game that's 3 times the size in the same time frame as Classic, with a much lower rules overhead to get people started. And if they buy some models, if they buy some rules, and they start playing the game, it's only a matter of time before they're going to be like, hey, there's that other cool rule set we could try. How do you feel about that?
So this, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, is a classic BattleTech focused podcast. And you mentioned in the Aces instruction, maybe not you personally, I pointed at you there. I was pointing at the mic. I'm like, you, Josh, #blame Josh. You mentioned this. The alpha rules mentioned that there was interest in eventually moving this to classic if there was success in Alpha Strike. And I'm wondering, from where you're sitting right now, what do you think about the feasibility of that? Because it is a different beast.
Yeah, it's certainly a tremendous challenge comparatively, and that was part of the reason why we had all agreed to do Alpha Strike as a proof of concept. Because the original concept was, well, let's go full classic, and nobody was really excited to do that. In some ways, like, doing Aces for Alpha Strike is the proof of concept that there's a framework to even be able to leverage to figure out what has to be modified or added to for Classic, right? I've played enough Classic now that I have a pretty good sense of where the holes are and what you would need to patch. The biggest challenge from my perspective is just that Alpha Strike's kind of great in the sense that every unit is kind of the same. The loop you're iterating on rapidly in Alpha Strike is the initiative order and who's moving where and who's shooting at what. The very basic distilling core loop of a BattleTech engagement. Whereas in Classic, the nuances of like, okay, well, how many hexes of movement do I have? Which way do I turn and face? How much of my weaponry am I going to fire at this range? Because my range bands are all different for all my different weapons and they all generate as much heat. Like, there's a lot more nuance to making good choices in Classic, I think, than there is in Alpha Strike.
Yeah.
And that's really the main challenge. And because there are so many nuances, you have so many different units. I can't just say, oh, here's the Brawler deck for Classic. God, no. It's completely different if that guy has got LBX cannons versus rotary autocannons or PPCs or the specific weaponry he's carrying and how it's arranged.
Yeah.
It matters a lot more. And therefore, you need more specialized AI to be able to run it.
One mech might be able to jump jet and alpha strike every turn. Another one may melt into a pool of slag if it shoots too many M lasers at the same time. How do you build something that can handle both of those things?
Yeah, and like even with the Alpha Strike decks that currently exist, I think there's 4 of them in the initial prototype. There are 7 battlefield roles printed on the Alpha Strike cards and like listed places. So for sure there's those. I think realistically there's a couple versions of each one, just even at the Alpha Strike level of like what they can do. Because not every brawler is a long range damage stat in the game. If they've, if they're kitted out with exclusively medium lasers or a lot of SRMs, they won't even get a damage value that long, which would be 14, 15 hexes, I think, in Classic is where is sort of the conversion. Approximately where they think medium range ends and long range begins.
Yeah, for medium lasers, that I think 15 for an ER medium laser is the range.
Yeah, because in Alpha Strike, everything in the entire game is just 3 range bands. You've got short range, which is 6 inches or 3 hexes. Medium range, which is 24 inches to 12 hexes, actually. And the long is 42 inches or 21 hexes. And that's like an ER PPC, if I recall.
Yeah, going back to your like 3 principles, it is so much easier to make a bad move in BattleTech Classic.
Absolutely.
If you took the model that you're using for Alpha Strike right now and copied over to BattleTech, I feel like functionally lots of things could work, but the mech specifics, as you say, matter so much. So you couldn't just copy this AI across all brawlers. It's like, okay, we have the Masakari A build, and we have, it would be such a small pool.
Yeah, you almost need an AI or a way to make an AI for every chassis and loadout, which is kind of a
daunting prospect. Yeah.
a Sisyphean task. Like, you're going to be rolling that boulder up the hill for a very long time. To the end of time, perhaps.
I guess the focus then, like you said, wouldn't be, so don't build it out for each chassis or variant. Instead, you build out a system that automates it for you. But man, that's going to be complicated, especially when you consider stuff like we play with advanced rules. I mentioned that earlier. Like, where do you set the line? Actually, that's a good point too. With aces, because I know Alpha Strike has advanced rules. Where did you set the line? Where's the rule limit?
Most of the guts of Alpha Strike, where things get a little weird and might impact your specific strategy, are in the special ability keywords. But even there, and I have a big spreadsheet of them now, even there, most of them are actually keyed into optional rules that you wouldn't necessarily play with unless you're running some kind of campaign in Alpha Strike or you're tracking things from mission to mission. A lot of the keywords in Alpha Strike are for that. Most of the remaining ones are fairly passive. They don't really change what you should be doing. They just give you advantages when you do certain things. Things like case. There's if a mech has most of its ammo in case, in Alpha Strike, you just have the case keyword, which protects you from an ammo critical hit. Like, it's that simplified down. So you don't need any real logic about, like, oh, well, it doesn't matter that I have case. I'm still going to play the same way. There are a handful that are like, yeah, you might want to change that a little bit. There are some mechs that have a large number of jump jets, or they're extra strong. And those guys have, like, the jump strong keyword in Alpha Strike, which actually increases they have better than average benefit from jumping. Stuff like that. Those are like, oh, you probably want a deck for that guy that's going to jump more often, because a human player is probably always going to jump that mech. That's kind of the extent of where the rules detail you even need to get into with Alpha Strike. There is some difference we found with, like, a brawler mech is different than a brawler tank or a brawler VTOL. Sort of exist, but they're kind of rare. You need some different instructions to follow to make it as seamless as possible, where, like, don't even make me think about it. Don't tell me to use jump jets and then in the rules tell me I have to do ground if the unit doesn't have jump jets. Like, no, we'll try and get rid of all of that sort of thing. To use the right deck for the right mech, it should be as simple as following instructions in Alpha Strike.
I see. Well, thinking of, like, Classic, when I imagine creating an AI in Classic, I feel like it would actually be okay to even just say, okay, we only use the basic Total Warfare core rules for the AI. Because most of the advanced rules, in my opinion, don't fundamentally change the game. They just enhance the game. So you could still have the players playing with advanced rules and the AI playing with the basic rules. It'd make you feel more heroic. It'd put you more in the universe. I think it would be cool. And then you could up the BV value of the AI.
Absolutely.
Yeah, little cool things like that I think could be possible.
I was curious about this as well when we posted the Mercenaries decks. And I did get some playtest feedback from people who didn't actually own the Alpha Strike box set. They were like, oh, well, I don't have any of those data cards, so I'm just going to try and run Classic with the Aces decks, understanding that they weren't meant for this, just to see how far off they are or where the holes are. And really the only, like, the overarching target priority for, like, what I should chase and fire at, that all kind of works. It's really just the nuances of heat management and specific weapon selection that you need extra stuff for.
That makes sense. That's cool. Oh, man. There's lots of people out there already churning this through their brains at Classic. That's awesome. Well, Josh, I'll give you 3 months to wrap up the project and get it my way to try.
Well, and like you've said that you've played a lot of Classic. You know the game system relatively well, rules bungles aside. I would say you probably have enough experience with the game to be able to use the Aces deck as a guidepost and fill in the rest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the logic will be a little bit fuzzier than if you were playing Alpha Strike and you had explicit instructions. But I feel like players with your experience level and comfort level with Classic probably wouldn't have much of a struggle doing that, even in the short term, even in the current form of the deck.
Yeah, you're right. We should try it. Next game, Michael, we're doing it. Commit to it, Michael, right now.
I'd give it a shot. There's a whole new dimension we can make bungles on.
There you go.
Now we can misunderstand the AI rules and do that wrong too.
Excellent. Sweet.
Do you think you can make BattleTech Aces bungle-proof?
I don't think anything can be made bungle-proof.
Fair enough.
Speaking as someone who's had to write rule books, I don't think it's possible.
I would agree with you, Josh. Awesome. Well, this has been like super cool, super interesting. I'm actually I'm hyped. I'm super hyped about this. People want to know more if they're on the Blame Josh hashtag train. Where can they find more information? How can they connect with you? What's the best way?
So I would say there's two main places. Lynnvander.rocks is our company website. There's links on there to our public-facing Discord server and our mailing list and all of that sort of stuff. And of course, our web store if you want to check out any of our other board games. Most of the content that we are doing now, or posting places and actively streaming or whatnot, is on our Twitch channel, which is actually our partner Twitch channel sibling company, which is called Six Sides of Gaming.
Great. Okay, I'll find those links and I'll make sure that they are linked in the episode description for people that want to hunt you down.
Sounds great.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom here today. It was amazing. Michael, anything else? Any closing points that you want to stick to Josh? You want to mess him up a little bit? You want to confuse him? You want to make him bungle? You want to do something? Get in there, Michael. Get in there.
Well, we'll save the bungling for the table. No, this has been super cool. Alpha Strike something I've been interested in for a while. And I'm with Nathan. This is a super cool project, and I really want to see how it turns out for the final version.
There's a lot of stuff that's been moving behind the scenes. Like obviously the Catalyst team is very busy doing everything for the Mercenaries Kickstarter and all of those rewards. But there have been a lot of developments and a lot of things kind of just humming along behind the scenes that nobody knows about yet. And obviously I can't speak too much about that, but I'm very excited for the project and some of the other things that I know are coming as part of it. And some of the liberties I've been given as well by the line developers and such at Catalyst. Ray and Randall have been fantastic to work with in and out. I talk to them pretty regularly about Aces.
Awesome. Cool. Are we going to talk a bungle now?
Yes. On to the bungles.
I'm Professor Michael, presenting more of The Sphere We Live In. Throughout the sphere today, few technologies are more vital than the miraculous jump ships plying routes between habitable worlds, and most of those still in service today are relics from the Star League. A recent study by Dr. Frabby et al. Of the Sarna Institute estimated that approximately 46% of registered jump ships are Invader class, popular for their cost-effective operations, while 32% are Merchant class, a flexible model sometimes pressed into military service. Together, these two models account for more than 3/4 of all known jump-capable vessels. Now you know about the sphere we live in.
Tertiary Objective, Battlefield Outcome Report segment. Initiating.
Nathaniel Smithson here, once again on the battlefield in the middle of a heated engagement between Clan Jade Falcon and a mercenary attaché of Pawnstar. The Jade Falcon, piloting a Shrike, has made sound work of the facility being guarded by the mercenaries. And now, a gunslinger and Warhammer chase it with vengeance in their hearts. The mercenary units have already sunk their teeth into the left side of the Shrike and left its arm in tatters. Supporting the mercenary pursuit, artillery has been raining down from above on the Shrike, but its maneuvering has been unpredictable, resulting in the mech taking little damage from it. Time is short for the mercenaries as the Shrike is near the recently negotiated DMZ. All it needs to do is cross that line of trees in the distance, and the mercenaries will be forbidden from pursuing further. The recently negotiated DMZ acts as an informal extension of... What? In a dramatic twist of events, the Shrike has leapt back into the fire and... My God! What happened? I swear, it was right there a moment ago. Where did it go? How? Has the head of that Warhammer... It's been... right off by the talon beat of the clan machine that somehow miraculously doubled back in a vindictive strategy. The mercenary units are flabbergasted and they are retreating, ceding the field to the Jade Falcon warrior. Rack this up as another loss of the inner spheres of the alleged superior warriors of the clans. This has been Nathaniel Smithson, Iron and boots on the ground, always first on the scene.
So, what happened? A Shrike utilized a unique initiative deck card to set up a sneaky bait and switch opportunity that led to an effective and shocking kill. Well then, how did it happen? In an attack and defend mission, a Shrike 3 had completed its primary objective and was retreating from the battlefield while being pursued by a nearly unscathed gunslinger and Warhammer, all while a variety of artillery bombardments landed around him. A few rounds before the Shrike could reach his extraction point, he drew the BattleTech Initiative Deck card called Feint. This card allows a player to, in the weapon's attack phase after weapon declaration, declare that a unit cannot make any weapon attacks, and receive any weapon attacks, essentially allowing them to disappear for a moment. The mercenary lance was aware the Shrike held this card, but had no choice to pursue it aggressively as it neared extraction. However, in this pursuit, the mercenary unit didn't consider that the Shrike had a potential reason to double back. Well, it turned out the Shrike had a hidden objective: destroy an opponent unit with a physical attack. And as the mercenary unit overextended to chase the Shrike, the mech jumped right beside one of the pursuers, standing one level above it. The interesting thing about the Feint card is you activate it after people declare their attacks, and it only impacts the weapon attack phase. This means the Shrike was not only able to negate all the weapon attacks coming its way in the very exposed position it had put itself, but it also meant that the limbs using those weapons in the weapon attack would not be able to be used for physical attacks as per standard rules, despite being completely exposed. Because the mercenaries decided to shoot, the Feint card made the Shrike literally untouchable. The rest was simple, and we've all been there. An easy roll for a kick to land, and then a 1 out of 6 chance to kick off the head. Bam! A 6 was rolled, 19 damage to the head. The circumstance of this battle, coupled with this unique initiative card, produced an unorthodox yet viable strategic opportunity for the Shrike. And dude, kicking off heads in BattleTech never gets old.
I'm Professor Michael, presenting more of The Sphere We Live In. During the early days of the Word of Blake crisis, a number of mercenary companies accepted contracts to fight on their behalf. Even after the Mercenary Review Board blacklisted the Word and associated individuals, many smaller companies were retained with offers of high pay and access to advanced equipment. Take, for example, Jacob's Juggernauts. Nearing bankruptcy and with their force reduced to a single company, they accepted an early contract with the Word, and within 2 years had grown to a full 3 companies of light mechs and heavy tanks. This lucrative deal led them to continue working with the Word until 3073, when they deserted, joining a resistance strike and eventually dissolving following the death of their commanding officer. Now you know about the sphere we live in.
Secondary objective, rule check discovery segment. Initiating.
Hey everybody, welcome back to our rule check discovery segment. And you can hashtag blame Josh for this one because this is a rule mistake from Alpha Strike because we invited him to suggest one. And as you know from our previous conversation, he is most experienced in Alpha Strike. So, Josh, what is the bungle? Someone like you that designs games that is perfect that sees things, that sees everything connected, the interweb, the Venn diagrams. You see it, you understand it, yet you made a mistake. What was it? What could it be?
So this is an interesting one that I feel like the rulebook has the correct rule, but the interpretation of the rule without specific examples sets you up for failure. So Alpha Strike, all of the measurement and movement distances that you would measure with a tape measure are basically derived from Classic, right? Something that would move 4-6 in Classic has a movement value of like 10 inches in Alpha Strike. Usually it's 2-to-1. They just took the walking speed and doubled it. So it'd be 8 inches in Alpha Strike. And the rules for Classic, whenever you enter woods or other terrain that increase the movement point cost to enter. So, if you're walking into woods, it's 1 to enter plus 1 for, entering the terrain. Those rules are also translated in Alpha Strike in the form of, well, wood just costs an extra inch of your movement for every inch you want to travel through. On paper, that sounds great. That's the metaphor and the translation is clear. In practice, when you're on the table, measuring tapes have like fractions of an inch, right? You've got, you can go, I'll run up to this woods with half an inch of movement left on my tape measure. And if I spend half of that half or a quarter inch, I can move the last quarter inch and overlap my base onto the woods template, thereby giving myself the defensive bonus for being in a woods hex for anyone who's firing at me. And this is apparently not how this is supposed to work. I'm going to straight up blame Randall and some other people who wrote the rulebook for Aces for this one, because Randall did this to me in person with this rule as well. This is not just my bungle, but it has been changed in the 6th printing of the Alpha Strike rulebook, which is, in order to enter woods, you actually need 2 full inches of movement left. If you run right up to the woods and you're a quarter inch away from it, you actually need 2 more inches to enter the woods. You can't just use a fraction of an inch and step in and claim that bonus. So it makes woods were actually relatively easy to run through and maneuver through in Alpha Strike. The intent is actually that they are much more wall-like and more impassable than you might think.
The rationale here is that in order to start a movement, you need to have an inch to move, and then it's plus 1 inch because it's forest. Is that sort of the idea?
It's kind of the idea, but the fact that you're using a tape measure that allows you for fractions of movement points, you can say, oh, it's only a quarter inch away. Okay, so then doubled, it's a half inch away, right? And if I've got a quarter inch of movement left, no, I should be good. I can pay for that. Mm-hmm. No, it's explicitly, everything is supposed to be in whole inches. So to make that last quarter inch movement, you need 2 inches of movement. 1 to go in and 1 for the woods.
Feels a lot like classic BattleTech, actually, in terms of there's a hard cost. You gotta pay that +1 to enter light and +2 to enter heavy. So that feels a little bit consistent with that. But that's cool because then, as you said, initially woods were this sanctuary. Oh, we're gonna run into the woods and dance with the fairies and be protected. Everything's gonna be wonderful. But now it's a wall. It's a trap. You could trap someone at the edge of the woods. Set the woods on fire. Get him!
Well, the thing that we were seeing, and I saw players do this, and I would have the AI do this whenever I was operating it. If you've got a woods template that's like 6 inches in diameter, you have your mech run around the outs. Like if it's between you and the enemy, you have your mech run around the outside of that template and then just step a quarter inch onto the edge of it at the end of the move and be in woods. And it's like, well, sure. And then 3/4 of my mech, like his tippy toe is standing in the woods and the rest of him is in the open on the table. But no, he gets that +1 to your hit bonus because he's in woods. It's like, well, no. The other thing that also helps is if you take the paradigm of like a hex is 2 inches and you just lift the intent from classic and put it into Alpha Strike, it also makes sense that if you're in woods, you can shoot out of woods that are within 2 inches of you because they're technically in your hex. Like they wouldn't count to your line of sight. That's the other change that was made much more clear in the 6th printing of the Alpha Strike rule.
Yeah, it's you can imagine how that changes the battlefield. It sort of reminds me of a mistake we previously talked about, which was water. And we all used to think water was like this safe sanctuary. Yeah. Go into the water. It's easy. You'll be protected. It's a splash pad. You're having a good time. Missiles gonna hit your legs. No worries. Just chill in the water. And then the actual rules in Classic is it's hell. You're doing a piling check every single thing you go through. It's brutal. Stay away from the water.
I was going to say the piloting check is the
Yeah.
thing everyone forgets.
Oh. And then breaches too. Like, it's just water is horrible. So this sort of feels like that,
Yep.
where it's like, okay, a wood is not necessarily positive. And it sort of makes sense. You can't just like barrel into woods. Like, you'd have to navigate a little bit. So it makes sense that there's MP to go in there.
Mhm.
And it's so powerful, that advantage of, you know, it's harder to hit you, so straight defensive bonus that only takes you a half inch of movement to like you say, stick your toe in. That it's going to be like really distorting to the strategies. You're always going to want to be within, you know, an arm's reach of a forest. Like you say, you're just stenciling around the outside to hop in and fight and then hop back out.
Absolutely. And we saw that happen. And because that was my understanding of the rules, that's how the AI was written. It was like, oh, we're going to, you know, BattleTech Aces AI, like, oh, yeah, woods are great. We always want to be near woods if we can be, because it's so easy to get that bonus. Like, well, maybe not. Maybe we should not prioritize woods so hard. Maybe we should put it on the same par as having partial cover. Like,
Man, why is the AI all woods people? They're a bunch of hippies. They're always just running around the forest. I feel bad shooting them.
there's this lovely woods 2 inches from my deployment area. I'm going to stand there the entire game and never leave. Come fight me.
Listen, that's optimal play. You know, the BattleTech Aces doesn't make the rules; that they just play the game.
Don't blame the AI, blame the game.
Except when the intention was different, it was just perhaps unclear in the writing. But I'm glad to hear that they've improved that. We've had quite a few things where, you know, in Classic, the new Battle Mech manual is so much clearer than all the old rule books. So
For sure.
nice that Alpha Strike's getting that clarity as well. Because I guess it's a much younger game, so it hasn't had quite as many decades for everyone to learn the classic blunders.
I think that's partly true, and as well as it has a smaller player base. A lot of people have never played Alpha Strike. They've played Classic up to like company scale and been like, no, that's fine. I'm good with playing, like, you know, company scale scenario in Classic. And I think there are probably not too many people who have played battalion scale games in any rule set, Classic or Alpha Strike. But they're very much more possible in Alpha Strike.
All right, change the plans, Michael. Next game, battalion size, BattleTech Aces, Classic, on Hexless. We're just gonna go crazy. Make all the bungles. We'll have 50 new bungles for you.
Yeah, we got to generate more content.
We got to stack rules in a way to make us make mistakes. I like it. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that, Josh. That actually makes a lot of sense. And I mean, it's pretty clear what the impact is. And it's good to know that even a master game designer who sees through the world, unlike us peons, can make a mistake too.
Like the Matrix code dangling down before me.
He sees the rules.
Is that what it's like when you design a game? You just like matrix code everywhere?
A friend of mine told me once. I went over to his house and he had this new game, and I was like, give me like 10 minutes. And I read the rulebook cover to cover and then taught the game. And he was just like, I think you've evolved beyond the need to play these games. I think you can just read the rulebook and go,
Oh
it's a cool
yeah,
game.
I see how that will play out. That's very interesting. Lots of decision space. Anyways, what else you got?
Yeah, exactly.
Read the book. Good game. See you later. What? What just happened? Oh, you lost.
I feel sorry sometimes for people who are like, when I'm at conventions and I go around to other people's booths and people try and pitch me games or explain how games work to me, I'm just like, oh, okay, cool, yeah, I got it.
Cool game. It's like that other one.
I try really hard not to be obnoxious about it because I know I can be, because I'm like, oh, I've played the 4 games that are the influences for this.
Well, we will let you return to the Matrix from whence you came, good sir. Thank you for being here today. It's been really insightful. I'm sure everyone's really excited to play Aces and no longer make the mistake with woods on the battlefield when they're playing Alpha Strike. We are enlightened.
There you go. Go smash some mechs. Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Professor Michael, presenting more of The Sphere We Live In. Klarna historians are perplexed by a recent HPG transmission received at the High Spire 4 circuit. The message appears to be an historical news report recounting a major combat action referred to as Operation Lancaster, and organized by Dreadnought Interstellar Industries, a name which does not appear in any house corporate registries. The report goes on to describe a number of mercenary companies not in MRB records, and more than 30 unknown models of battle mechs and vehicles. Many have already called the report a hoax, but others say the detail of the work indicates a previously unknown incident, or even a cover-up from the Capellan Confederation. Now you know about a sphere not quite our own.
Tertiary objective. Stories of the Inner Sphere segment. Initiating.
Central Viry City, Ashcombe 4, 30th of January, 3077. Maximus took a long and lazy drag on the poorly rolled cigarette between his lips. He savored the smoke, and the creeping burn in his chest the longer the smoke remained caged in his lungs. He exhaled, calmly, and repeated until it was nothing more than a stub. Casually spitting it out of his mouth and onto the ground below him, he took out another of the poorly rolled sticks and lit it. Again, he dragged and exhaled until it was a stub, spitting it onto the ground. He reached for another from his cooling jacket pocket, but decided against it as the wind picked up. There was a scent on the wind of burned metal and a chemical fire nearby. Sounds could be heard as well. Thunderous explosions, small arms fire, the stomping of battle mechs, and other sounds of battle made Maximus's hand shake ever so slightly with anticipation. Shaking and then rubbing his shaved head, Maximus descended the short ladder of welded rungs from the top of Warcrime, his Cyclops battle mech, to reach the entrance to the pilot cabin. Slipping into the opened hatch on the side of the mech's head, he turned and worked the hatch lever until the door was sealed and the cabin pressurized. He relished the smell of the sweat-tainted recycled air that he was breathing and shuffled his way to the command chair. His reworked Cretan Cyclops had quite the roomy cockpit once the advanced electronic systems had been removed. It was so roomy, in fact, he'd a small place where he could sleep, and a corner with a chem toilet securely locked into a place and made of a heat-resistant plastic. Having been a MechWarrior for so long, the importance of not having to get out of his machine to sleep or relieve himself was never to be understated. It was too risky to pitch a tent or climb out to take a leak in any theater, so why not bring those amenities into the protected confines of his mech? A strange trophy from long ago, a hula girl novelty toy, sat on the shelf of the cockpit window and would perpetually shake at him when he piloted the mech. It was always watching him, but never judging. Flopping himself into the command chair, Maximus worked on a pair of skin-tight fingerless gloves. They had lines of sweat running through them. Some were brown, and others white, intertwining to make a pattern that reflected his journey across the stars or the beams of light so commonly seen on the battlefield. These gloves were old, but just as much a part of him and his mech as his cooling vest and neurohelmet. Sweaty hands could be detrimental in a firefight, and these gloves never let him down. He flipped a series of switches, pressed a row of buttons, and readied himself to recite the phrase needed to authorize the starting of his battle mech. A sultry female voice came from the two speakers he had mounted above the Cyclops viewing window, and asked him simply, "Who are you, cretin?" Maximus felt a wry grin twist his face as he answered with a scratchy, deep voice. "I am a murderer, awaiting his promised visit to the hell of his victims." The female voice did not answer. Instead, the fiery heart of his battle mech roared to life, pouring power into the limbs of the machine. He cycled his weapons, 4 LB-10X autocannons while simultaneously working the arms. Satisfied with his startup checks, he then began the process of attaching vitals monitoring pads to his temples and chest, in turn, plugging wires into the pads. He then grabbed the hefty neural helmet that all MechWarriors had to wear to pilot their giant metal avatars. Seated firmly onto his head, he plugged it into a panel beside his chair and focused on the flood of information streaming into the helmet. Radio chatter. Both calls for help and calls for violence poured over him. Grainy video feeds showed Word of Blake units converging on different points and killing anyone that was not them. He continued to watch as Blakist battle mechs fired lasers and missiles into buildings full of people, stomping cars trying to get away, and generally living up to their reputation for being murderers and genocidal maniacs. Maximus was equal parts jealous and repulsed. It was not like he was some kind of unhinged murderer. No. He had standards. A code of sorts that he was cloaked in. This kept him from being in the same pool as these zealous murderers. It was what kept him employed with the Ronin Free companies, despite the warnings of the units he angered during Operation Bulldog. Even the warnings from Outreach about him, most of which pertained to things like needless and excessive brutality unbecoming of a MechWarrior, seemingly left Donaldaris Meridius, his employer, unperturbed. Maximus supposed Meridius either did not care, or that he saw the bigger picture. What did those idiots know about command? About sacrifice? About doing what was necessary for results? Maximus had always done what it took to get the job done. It was what his handlers drilled into his brain as a child after his kidnapping and brainwashing. You're a killer, boy, but you must remember you have a creed. The mission is always your priority, and anyone in the way is an obstacle to be swept aside, crushed. At the time, when he was but a child, his mission was to escape. After killing his captors with some jagged piece of glass, Maximus disappeared into the underbelly of that planet. Soon, he found himself on a transport to Solaris 7, where his life really took off. Blood sports, assassinations, good old-fashioned robberies, and eventually, learning to pilot a battle mech. He had stolen the Cyclops he now piloted, got rid of the worthless electronics suite, and lived in his battle mech from then on. He took contracts with numerous units, fought the clans, and even took the fight to them. The clans were a real test, and an opponent if he had ever found one. His last fight with them resulted with Maximus blowing up a large gas refinery, destroying 2 companies' worth of clanners retreating through it. The clanners thought the place too valuable to warrant destruction, as did the local government and leaders on planet during Operation Bulldog. Maximus saw it as a solution. Still, even after the incident had drummed him back to Solaris 7, he was never short of work. Donaldaris Meridius found him at some point and shaped him into Bludgeon in the Shadow Wars against the Word of Blake. Black Ops missions where failure was death. Given a mission, he completed it, got paid, and Meridius never asked questions. Success was enough. Now, with Operation Lancaster tanking fast with the arrival of the Word of Blake's 55th Shadow Division, Free Colonel Meridius gave him a new mission.
Destroy as many of them as you can. Help is on the way, but you need to survive with as many friendlies as possible. Ronin Actual, out.
His mission was clear, simple, and had an attainable goal. Maximus had taken up a position near a skyscraper belonging to some inter-system banking company. Nearly 60 stories of hardened ferro concrete and steel with more glass than seemed reasonable. It was the size of a couple city blocks, but had apparently been built cheaply by the company. All that money and no sense, he thought. It was long evacuated, so it was simple to convince the engineers and other forces with him to rig the building to collapse across the freeway running through the city at his command. This would cut the Word of Blake forces into two parts, destroy the easiest means of navigation, and send up an obscuring cloud so thick that sensors, both thermal and others, would be obscured for hours, not days. More than enough time for him to eliminate as many of the enemies he could before backup arrived and got in his way. Seismic readouts in his mech let Maximus know it was time. He keyed his microphone 5 times, waited a few seconds, and then keyed it twice more. The signal was the only warning that anyone in the area would have of what he was about to do. As he watched, infantry quickly take cover and tank crews dog the hatches of their tanks in front of him, he knew that the message had been received by those it was meant for. He waited 30 seconds, and just as a number of Word of Blake machines came pouring into sight, he triggered the firing studs on both of his control sticks. A full volley of high-explosive autocannon slugs blasted into the mountains of explosives wired into the building right next to the approaching Blakist mechs. The resulting explosion was massive, continuing to build and shaking everything in a 10-mile radius with the resulting shockwave. The building immediately collapsed into a tidal wave of steel, concrete, and glass that rained down on the freeway, smashing an unknown amount of Word of Blake units into slag. The fiery explosions of their fusion reactors and munitions snuffed out by the deadly cloud of dust and debris. A whole bunch of fancy Blakist Omni-Mechs and supporting combat vehicles met their end in that sea of debris. But it seemed that nearly as many managed to survive through luck and quick reflexes. Maximus cracked his neck and coaxed Warcrime forward, making for the remains of the freeway and the units that had managed to survive. The thick cloud of dust, made up of so much ferrocrete and metal shavings, threw most sensors into complete disarray. It was useful because it forced everyone to use thermal vision. Like most members of his team, Maximus's Cyclops ran very cool temperature-wise. They could blend into the cloud like ghosts, stalking the shook-up Blakists and their machines. Switching to his thermal sensors, Maximus could see the flashing infrared beacons of his fellows as they plunged into the clouds. These beacons were the only friend or foe identifiers they had, and anyone who did not have one would end up smashed like the remains of the building around them. Stomping into the cloud, Maximus took with him a cold brutality and his mission. His mission was to stop as many as he could, and he would be damned if he did not complete his mission as ordered. Word of Blake Compound, Epsilon Eridani, January 7th, 3086. The Cyclops Assault Battle Mech, infamously known as Warcrime, is nearly as bizarre as it is unique. This battle mech was listed as destroyed during Operation Bulldog in 3059. However, at the same time, conflicting reports also indicate that it was never developed. In the end, it has somehow wound up in the hands of the mercenary unit known as the Ronin Free Companies. Speculation regarding this machine varies widely. Some suggest that the mech was salvaged and simply incorrectly documented post-Bulldog. Others believe it was stolen and the documentation of its destruction was forged just to cover up the theft. either by a collaborator in the theft of the machine or by a panicky requisitions officer trying to save face. Regardless of how this machine came to be in the hands of a mech warrior in the employ of the Ronin Free Company's mercenaries, war crime has since become a staple of the unit. Originally built by Grumium Creations in 3059, not much of the original CP-12K Cyclops remains, apart from its endosteel chassis. The original Hermes 3060 rated fusion engine has long since been sold off, while a less expensive and lighter weight Rawlings 270 rated unit has been installed in its place. Additionally, all the heat sinks outside the basic 10 units built into the reactor have been removed. All this weight reduction allowed for the installation of a brutal array of 4 Imperator Series LB-10X autocannons. The extensive modifications made to the Cyclops are believed to have been performed sometime in 3070, but no data exists to explain where the modifications were made, or even who was responsible for making them. Although the custom workmanship is reputed to be exemplary, it has not been without issues. Most notably, the ammunition feeds routed from the mech's legs proved to be remarkably unreliable until 3072, when a further light refit was performed to fix this problem. In addition to the rather single-minded armament, the armor has been reallocated rather strangely. The arms have been stripped down nearly to the point of being as thinly armored as the notoriously skinny CP-11A chassis variant, while the rest of the body has been reinforced heavily to the point of being on par with the extremely tough CP-10Q. The Tacticon B2000 battle computer, by far the most iconic piece of equipment associated with the Cyclops battle mech, has long since been removed from war crime. Finding the B2000 personally useless, owner-operator Sergeant Maximus Brackus Darius sold it. Darius has since created a small onboard personal living space that features an improved life support system inside the now relatively large interior of his battle mech's head. With its quartet of heavy autocannons, war crime is both remarkably versatile and hamstrung at the same time. Astonishingly brutal in short to medium range, this brawler of a machine is often compared to other mechs like the Annihilator. But this mech is faster and nearly as durable. War crime makes excellent use of its firepower by first punching moderate-sized holes in its target's armor with slug-type rounds. Then follows up with a barrage of shotgun-like cluster rounds, often damaging critical internal systems, and even sometimes striking ammunition bins, blowing targets apart from the inside. In cases such as lightly armored or damaged targets, the pilot might even mix the two ammunition types in the same bursts of weapon fire. The downsides of war crime are that it is slower than a standard Cyclops, and while it has at least reasonable supply of ammunition, the mech is completely ammunition dependent. As it begins to run low on ammunition, war crime is often forced to begin to withdraw from combat, lest its pilot find himself in the middle of a battlefield completely unarmed. However, should it run out of ammunition, or an enemy simply gets too close, war crime is capable of engaging in melee combat. That is, assuming its thinly armored arms are still intact, which by all appearances is a common problem, as the Ronin Free Company's mercenaries are seemingly forever in search of components to build Cyclops arms independently after a contract has been completed. Sergeant Maximus Brackus Darius. This dishonorably discharged ace pilot earned the nickname of Butcher for his tendency toward indiscriminate firing upon friend and foe alike during the later stages of Operation Bulldog. Due to a mixture of combat fatigue and an overall outlook of his fellow man being passive at best, Darius became known for taking any approach necessary to accomplish his given objectives. Success became all that mattered, with all other considerations becoming overwhelmingly secondary, including the lives of fellow soldiers and even civilians. Darius disappeared in 3061, seemingly without a trace. Suspiciously, his disappearance roughly corresponds with the time that the Cretan-made Cyclops vanished, which is the primary evidence indicating his likely involvement in the theft of the battle mech. He reappeared several years later, surfacing at the controls of his new Cyclops, trimmed in the color of sticky blood, around the edges of the standard blue and white quarter livery of the Ronin Free Company's mercenaries. Sergeant Darius is a remarkably successful mech warrior, but his successes often historically came at costs deemed unacceptable by his commanders. He appears to have calmed over the years, but his questionable exploits have continued even after he was picked up by the Ronin. During Operation Lancaster in 3077, Darius eventually found himself as part of a defense force at the center of Vyre City, the planetary capital city of Ashcombe IV. He and the other defenders were responsible for protecting a vast stockpile of nuclear and thermonuclear weapons from the elite Manet Domini troops of the Word of Blake's 55th Shadow Division, who were attempting to lay claim to it. When our Blakeist forces broke through the Ronin's eastern outer defensive line, pushing in force, Darius made the independent decision to literally bring down a 30-story building on top of 2 level 2s of celestial omnimechs. As he did not care enough to bother asking beforehand, he only found out afterward that the building had been successfully evacuated prior to his explosive action. Although the way he went about it has been met with some harsh criticism, there is no doubt that his actions, however reckless, most likely thwarted our advance. As of 3085, Sergeant Maximus Brachus Darius and his Cyclops Warcrime are still employed by the Ronin Free Company's mercenaries, with no indications that this status will change anytime soon. This has been an excerpt from Operation Lancaster. This story itself written by Donald Butler, with the overall fan project brought together by Devon Ramsey. Operation Lancaster is a fan-developed sourcebook revolving around an outside-of-canon operation. Some of this episode's Professor Michael segments have also been drawn from this source material. I've mentioned Operation Lancaster before, but it is an exceptional fan creation in every imaginable way. It needs to be seen by BattleTech fans. I've added a link to it in the episode description. It's free. Go check it out. That brings us to an end of another deployment of BungleTech. A quick congratulations to our winners of the Black Marauder Initiative Deck. We hope you love them as much as the game mode is cruel. If you entered the draw and didn't win a deck, remember, you can still print the cards off yourself. All the assets have been shared on our OneNote linked in our episode description. Also, one quick little change corresponding to our Patreon launch. Going forward, BungleTech will be consistently publishing an episode on the 27th of each month. Previously it's been around there, but we decided to commit to the cause and launch an episode of the 27th, Star League Day, every month going forward, starting in December. As always, you can find us via Discord, email, Twitter, and now Patreon, all linked in the description. And to those future Patreon supporters, we truly, truly, truly appreciate your support. Until next time, MechWarriors, good fortunes on the battlefield. Selah.
All podcast objectives complete. Podcast shutdown sequence initiated.